More than 4,500 years ago, a civilization dared to challenge the impossible. This is the untold story of how humans, not aliens, built the greatest wonder on Earth. There's a place on Earth where silence speaks louder than words, a land where time seems frozen, where the wind carries stories older than memory itself, a horizon of endless gold, stretching beneath a burning sun. And standing in the heart of this eternal desert are giants that defy logic, challenge imagination, and whisper to the heavens themselves. Egypt, long before skyscrapers touched the sky, long before man conquered oceans and air, a civilization rose along the great river Nile, a civilization so advanced, so determined, and so deeply connected to their beliefs that they changed the landscape of history forever. The people of Egypt did not merely build structures, they sculpted monuments to eternity. And among everything they created, nothing is more mysterious, more astonishing, and more breathtaking than the mighty pyramids of Giza. For thousands of years, they have stood undisturbed, desert guardians shrouded in mystery, vast stone mountains crafted by human hands, yet appearing almost supernatural in perfection. Each block weighs tons, each angle strikes with impossible precision, each design aligns with cosmic accuracy. It's as if the builders possessed knowledge beyond their era, as if the architect had conversations with the stars. But how? How did human beings thousands of years ago create one of the greatest wonders of all time? Who planned them? Who ordered them? Who engineered them? And what secrets are hidden inside their silent stone walls? To understand the pyramids, we must not start with stones or architects or pharaohs. We must begin with a powerful truth. Ancient Egyptians did not build for years. They built for eternity. They believed life did not end at death. Death was a doorway, a transition, a sacred passage into the afterlife. A pharaoh was not just a king. He was divine, chosen by the gods, destined to rule, not just a living world, but the eternal one. And for a god king, an ordinary tomb was never enough. He needed a gateway to immortality. Centuries before the Great Pyramid, people were still buried in simple desert graves. But powerful rulers demanded something greater. Soon, those simple graves transformed into mud brick tombs known as mastabas. Flat, rectangular, and strong, they were the first step towards something monumental. Then came a revolutionary mind, a single visionary who dared to think differently, a man named Imhotep, architect, engineer, genius of his era. He looked at the humble mastaba and imagined stacking them layer upon layer, reaching toward the sky. And for the first time in human history, stone replaced mud, geometry replaced instinct, engineering replaced simplicity, and the world witnessed the first pyramid, the step pyramid of Saqqara. At that moment, Egypt unlocked something profound. A door opened, and there was no going back. The pyramid was no longer just a tomb. It became a symbol of power, a message to gods, a challenge to time itself. From that day forward, pharaohs dreamed bigger, demanded stronger, desired greater. They wanted perfection. They wanted glory carved into desert rock. They wanted to be remembered not for centuries, but for forever. And so began an age of unimaginable ambition, tens of thousands of workers, vast resources, unbreakable will, unmatched genius. The desert roared with activity. Plans were drawn. Stone was quarried. Roads appeared where empty sand once existed. Tools struck. Voices shouted. The land trembled under a civilization pushing itself to the extreme. But within this ambition lay the greatest secret of all. The pyramids were not miracles. They were not made by aliens. They were not magic. They were human. Human effort. Human intelligence. Human belief. Men who woke every day under a burning sun. Men who carved each stone with patience. Men who carried the weight of both rock and destiny. And as the golden light of dawn illuminated the desert, each morning they built. They measured, aligned, calculated, perfected. They worked not as slaves of cruelty, but as craftsmen of pride, citizens honoring a divine king and a divine promise. This is where our journey begins. Not with conspiracy, not with fantasy, but with the determination of a civilization that refused to settle for ordinary. This is the story of how the pyramids were really built. This is a journey into engineering brilliance, human resilience, and timeless faith. A journey through sand and stone, science and spirit, mystery and truth. As the wind sweeps across the Giza Plateau, carrying echoes of the past, we step forward into a world where dreams were carved into mountains and eternity was shaped by human hands. To understand how the Great Pyramid was built, we must step into the mind of the man who ordered it, a king who saw himself not only as ruler of Egypt, but as a god destined to live forever. His name was Khufu. For most of the world, Khufu is remembered only as a name attached to a massive pyramid. But in his time, he was far more than a figure carved in history. He was power. He was authority. He was destiny itself. When Khufu ascended the throne, Egypt was already strong. Civilization was flourishing along the Nile. Trade was thriving. Temples stood tall. People believed their rulers bridged earth and the divine. But Khufu did not want to simply rule his lifetime. He wanted to dominate eternity. He looked at the desert plateau of Giza, a place where wind howled like an ancient spirit, and he envisioned something that had never been attempted before. Not a tomb, not a monument, but a statement to the universe, a mountain of precision, a symbol of perfection, a structure that would challenge time itself. Khufu did not merely command, build. He issued a challenge to every architect, every builder, every craftsman in his kingdom. Create something the world will never forget. To fulfill this command, Egypt gathered its greatest minds, mathematicians, stone masters, surveyors, engineers whose names history barely remembers, yet whose brilliance echoes through every block of the Great Pyramid. Before a single stone was touched, a plan was forged not on paper, not on digital screens, but through mental brilliance and mathematical mastery. They chose Giza, not randomly, but carefully. Beneath the desert sand lay a massive bedrock foundation, strong enough to carry unimaginable weight. The plateau was perfectly elevated, watching over the Nile and the horizon. This land was chosen with wisdom, foresight, and engineering intelligence. Then came the next miracle, one of the greatest feats in human precision. The pyramid had to be not only huge, not only strong, but perfectly aligned with the four cardinal directions of Earth. And somehow, thousands of years ago, they did it, with no satellites, with no computers, with no lasers, just knowledge, observation, astronomy, mathematical genius. They studied the stars. They watched the movement of the heavens. They measured shadows. They calculated sunrises and sunsets. And stone by stone, calculation by calculation, they aligned the Great Pyramid with astonishing accuracy to true north. Even today, modern engineers stand in awe. Even now, scientists admit this alignment is so precise, it rivals our modern tools. This was not accident. This was mastery. Once the location was chosen and the land prepared, the project truly began. And Egypt awakened to a storm of activity unlike anything seen before. The desert filled with life. Caravans transporting supplies. Workers traveling from across the kingdom. Architects moving between camps with tools and plans. Supervisors monitoring every detail. Specialists sharpening copper chisels. Foremen shouting commands through echoing winds. But here lies a truth the world must understand. The pyramids were not built by beaten slaves dragging chains under cruelty. That image is false. That myth is broken by archaeology, science, and history itself. The workers who built the pyramids were skilled craft laborers, engineers, stone cutters, rope makers, sled pullers, architects, organized into teams, trained, coordinated, and respected. They lived in specially built workers' villages, not in prison camps. They were fed meat, bread, beer, fish, onions, strong nutrition to give them power. They were given medical care. Archaeologists have discovered heel fractures, meaning if someone was injured, they were treated, not discarded. Why did they work? Not because of chains, not because of torture. They worked because building for Pharaoh meant building for the gods, and building for the gods meant earning honor in both life and afterlife. To them, this was not just construction. It was purpose, duty, sacred service. And so they began shaping the impossible. The first task, stone. Millions of tons of it. Quarries roared to life. Copper chisels scraped. Hammers pounded. Stone cutters carved perfect blocks. Each stone was not random, not rough, not careless. Each was measured, shaped with precision, prepared like a sacred offering. From nearby limestone to distant granite transported from Aswan, hundreds of kilometers away, they organized one of the largest logistics operations in human history. Boats carried stone along the Nile. Ramps were prepared. Roads formed. Teams positioned. And giant blocks began their journey. From quarry to river to desert to destiny. Imagine the sight. Rows of men hauling ropes, chanting in rhythm. Supervisors coordinating movement like an orchestra. Water poured on sand to reduce friction. Sun burning overhead. Wind roaring across dunes. But determination refusing to break. This was Egypt at its peak. Powerful. Organized. United under purpose. And as months turned into years, and years turned into more years, the base of the pyramid began to rise. Layer by layer. Stone by stone. Precision upon precision. Every level had to be perfect. Every corner sharp. Every alignment exact. There was no room for mistake. Because this was not a temporary structure. This was eternity. Khufu would not accept failure. Egypt would not allow it. And so, with every sunrise, with every hammer strike, with every rope pull, history was being shaped. A structure unlike anything before it. A monument that would dominate the horizon. A creation that would outlive empires, wars, civilizations, and time itself. The dream of a pharaoh was becoming reality. This was no longer just construction. This was transformation. The desert was changing. The world was changing. And the greatest wonder of human achievement was beginning to rise toward the heavens. When the foundation stones began to rise, something extraordinary emerged beside the pyramid. A city, not a city of royalty, not a place of luxury or wealth, but a living, breathing machine of human brilliance, discipline, and pride. The world rarely speaks of it. But hidden beneath the sands of Giza lies one of the most important forgotten chapters of history. The city of the pyramid builders. This was not chaos. This was not forced suffering. This was organization, precision, and unity on a scale humanity had never attempted before. Imagine the sight. Rows of structured houses. Streets aligned intelligently. Storage units packed with grain and food. Bakeries producing mountains of bread every single day. Workshops shaping tools. Medical areas caring for the injured. Supervisors recording progress, teams coordinating logistics, and thousands of workers living side by side, driven by one purpose. This was the world's first true industrial workforce, a civilization running like a perfectly tuned engine. The men who built the pyramids were not faceless slaves. They had names. They had families. They had pride. Archaeologists have uncovered graves of workers buried with respect, honored, remembered, cherished. Their tombs were placed near the pyramids because, in Egyptian belief, resting close to the pharaoh meant honor in the afterlife. These were not disposable laborers. They were heroes of Egypt. Teams were divided into organized groups, each with identity and pride. Stone haulers, rope handlers, ram constructors, engineers, stone polishers, alignment specialists, food suppliers, water carriers, tool makers, supervisors, and planners. Each group carried names like Friends of Khufu or the Drunkards of Menkaure, not as jokes, but as badges of unity and brotherhood. They laughed, they fought, they celebrated victories, they mourned losses, they lived human stories beneath the shadow of greatness. But life was not easy. Every sunrise began the same way. The sound of footsteps on sand, the tightening of rope, the tightening of muscles, the beating of hearts preparing for another day against gravity and stone. Copper tools scraped, wooden sledges creaked, sweat burned in the heat, hands blistered, bodies ached, yet they continued, because they were not just building stone, they were building destiny. One of the most miraculous parts of this story is how Egypt kept them alive and strong. Food caravans moved constantly. Boats along the Nile carried supplies. Livestock was slaughtered daily to maintain strength. Barrel after barrel of beer was brewed. Fish from the river. Vegetables from fertile farms. Onions and garlic, not for taste, but for energy and health. Egypt created one of the earliest fully supported workforce systems in human history. And behind this giant workforce stood another silent army. The planners, the architects, the thinkers. They did not swing hammers. They did not drag stone. But without them, the pyramid would collapse into chaos. They tracked schedules, calculated angles, measured progress, ensured every stone arrived at exactly the right moment, ensured ramps did not fail, ensured tools were available, ensured no mistake threatened the structure. This was not just engineering. This was civilization discipline at its peak. Yet, even with precision, even with organization, even with intelligence, nature remained a relentless enemy, heat scorching like fire, winds blasting sand across skin, bodies failing, injuries, exhaustion. Still, they returned every day, because this was bigger than survival. It was legacy. They believed they were carving their names into eternity. Even if history forgot their voices, their work would live through stone. Imagine the feeling, standing beside a block weighing tons, knowing you helped move it, knowing your strength contributed to history, knowing one day, thousands of years later, strangers would stare in awe at something you had given your life to. That is purpose. That is power. That is the human spirit at its greatest. Every evening when work ended, the city came alive again. Fires crackled. Stories were told. Music played softly. Men laughed together. Healers wrapped wounds. Mothers visited sons. Friends shared meals. Hearts rested so they could face another day. This rhythm continued for decades. Children were born during construction and grew up watching the pyramid rise. Young men joined their fathers. Generations united in a single mission. And all the while, above them, stone by stone, layer upon layer, a mountain was forming, massive, unstoppable, majestic. The pyramid was no longer a plan. It was real, towering, dominating the horizon, casting a shadow not just on the desert, but on time itself. And still, the world had not yet seen the greatest challenges, because the true test was not just lifting stones. It was shaping perfection, straight lines, perfect geometry, exact symmetry, human hands against impossible expectations. Yet this army of builders, this city of determination, this civilization of genius, was ready, because this was not just construction. This was Egypt proving to the universe that humans, when united by purpose, can do the impossible. As the pyramid continued its slow and mighty rise, Egypt stood at the edge of engineering genius. This was not blind labor. This was not random stacking of stone. This was mathematics turned into architecture, science turned into faith, precision turned into eternity. To build something so tall, so massive, so flawless, Egypt needed more than manpower. It needed intelligence. It needed innovation. It needed true engineering brilliance. Before the first stone touched the ground, Egypt's master architects had already solved problems most civilizations would not face for thousands of years. They had to answer questions larger than the stones themselves. How do you move millions of tons of rock? How do you lift blocks that weigh as much as cars today? How do you keep everything aligned? How do you ensure perfection from the first layer to the last? And they answered each question with genius. First came the ground. Underneath the sand of Giza lay solid bedrock. That bedrock became their foundation. They leveled the surface not with machines, but with water. Yes, water. Ancient engineers dug shallow trenches, filled them with water, and marked the highest points. Where water touched, stone was shaved. Where water did not reach, stone was raised. Nature itself became their measuring tool. Once the land was level, the true miracle began. The pyramid base had to be a perfect square. Each side had to match. Each corner had to lock into geometry with stunning precision. To accomplish this, they used ropes, shadow alignment, poles, and the stars. When night fell, ancient surveyors stared into the heavens. They watched constellations, measured star movement, tracked cosmic paths through time. The Great Pyramid was aligned almost perfectly with true north. Even today, modern buildings struggle to achieve this accuracy. Ancient Egypt did it, with eyes, with sky, with knowledge. And then came the blocks, millions of them, cut from limestone quarries nearby. Granite transported from Aswan over 800 kilometers away. Each stone shaped, each edge refined, each block measured. Copper chisels struck rock, stone hammer shattered chunks, sand polished surfaces, water smoothed edges. Nothing was careless. Even the shape of each stone mattered. Some blocks were slightly angled, some carved perfectly flat, some shaped for corners, others for inner layers. Egypt did not throw stones together. Egypt engineered a masterpiece. But perhaps the greatest question humanity always asks is this: how did they lift them? How did humans, without cranes, without steel, without modern machines, raise stones as heavy as elephants to such unbelievable heights? For centuries, theories existed, speculation, mystery, argument, but evidence carved beneath the sand, and science from modern archaeology reveal the truth. They built ramps, not tiny ramps, not short ramps, but massive architectural highways of stone, clay, and compacted sand. Ramps that climbed, ramps that curved, ramps that twisted around the structure like ancient serpents. Some scholars believe in straight ramps, some in zigzag ramps, some in internal ramps hidden within the pyramid shell. But one truth remains unshaken. The Egyptians built a system that worked. Teams lined along ropes. Men poured water to reduce friction. Wooden sledges dragged stone forward. Rhythm controlled effort. Chanting synced power. And slowly, patiently, relentlessly, stone traveled upward, block by block, layer by layer, year after year. Every level demanded recalculation. Every height demanded stronger coordination. Every rise demanded more intelligence. Engineers measured angles constantly. If one side rose even slightly more than another, if symmetry fell apart, if alignment broke, the entire structure would fail. Yet it didn't, because these builders were not guessing. They were executing a plan crafted by minds ahead of their age. Inside the pyramid, another layer of complexity emerged. Hidden corridors, air shafts carved with precision, perfectly measured chambers. Most stunning of all, the king's chamber, constructed from enormous granite slabs, each weighing up to 80 tons, transported hundreds of kilometers, placed deep inside the pyramid's core. Above the chamber, multiple relieving spaces of stone were stacked, distributing pressure, protecting the room from collapse. No trial and error, no blind attempt. This was architectural psychology, understanding how stone behaves, how weight travels, how gravity presses. This was ancient engineering at its supreme height. Imagine the silence inside those chambers as they were built, torches flickering, dust floating in beams of light, men whispering orders, stone grinding, tools striking granite with echoing thunder. They were carving eternity from darkness, and still, precision remained absolute. Corners aligned within fractions, angles nearly perfect, height transitioning smoothly to the final apex. Even today, with technology, machines, and supercomputers, this achievement challenges modern engineering. And yet, Egypt did it with brains, hands, discipline, and unity. But engineering didn't end with building. It extended to logistics. They built roads, organized stone fleets, constructed supply chains along the Nile, timed construction around seasonal flooding, used the river like a conveyor belt. Egypt turned nature into its greatest helper. This civilization did not fear challenge. It embraced it, studied it, conquered it, and while stones rose toward the sky, the world began to understand This was not just a project. This was not just a royal tomb. This was a declaration. Human beings, with enough will and intelligence, can reshape the earth itself. As winds roared across the plateau, and sun scorched the sands, and the pyramid reached higher and higher, Egypt proved something eternal. Greatness is not magic. Greatness is not myth. Greatness is discipline, knowledge, and relentless determination. And so the pyramid kept rising, higher, stronger, more glorious, a monument not only to a king, but to the genius of mankind. Year after year, season after season, under the blazing Egyptian sun, the Great Pyramid continued to rise, not in haste, not in chaos, but in steady, disciplined, relentless determination. For the builders, time blurred. Days became months. Months became years. Years became a lifetime of work. Children who once watched the early foundations being built grew into young men who joined their fathers in the workforce. And older builders, those who had once carried the first stones, watched with pride as the structure towered above the horizon. The pyramid was no longer a dream. It was a living giant of stone. Every morning, before the sun stretched across the desert sky, the Giza Plateau awakened to the rhythm of work, footsteps crunching in sand, ropes tightening, wood scraping against stone, commands echoing through the wind, a symphony of effort playing endlessly. The lower levels of the pyramid were wide and massive, requiring intense manpower. Millions of stones had already been lifted and placed into flawless formation. But as the structure grew taller, the challenge evolved. Now, every stone had to travel higher. Every pull required greater strength. Every misstep became more dangerous. Ramps stretched longer. Slopes became steeper. Wind pressure intensified the higher they climbed. Yet the workforce did not break. They adapted. They improved. They became stronger. Egypt's builders were not merely laborers anymore. They were veterans of the impossible, masters of their craft, men whose bodies were sculpted by years of unimaginable effort. Their hands were calloused and scarred, their backs hardened, their muscles carved by endurance. But inside them burned something greater than pain, purpose. Each day they climbed the ramps, and the higher they went, the closer they felt to the sky. It was as if they were touching the heavens, as if the gods themselves were watching. To those builders, this was spiritual, this was sacred. And high above the plateau, overlooking all activity, the architect stood, constantly calculating, constantly measuring, constantly ensuring that this rising mountain of stone did not drift even a fraction out of perfection. The higher the pyramid rose, the more fragile precision became. Imagine drawing a perfect square. Now imagine stacking it upward hundreds of layers. Every slight error at the bottom would multiply by the top. There was no forgiveness in this structure. So engineers checked every angle. They measured every corner. They aligned every level. If something was even slightly off, they reshaped, they corrected, they perfected. Failure was simply not an option, because this was not something that could be rebuilt. This was not a structure to try again later. This was Egypt's eternal promise to the future. And the future was judging. As the pyramid rose, the entire kingdom felt its presence. Travelers could see it from miles away. Boats along the Nile passed by in awe. Villagers stopped and stared, overwhelmed by its sheer magnitude. Foreign envoys wrote about it in astonishment. It was not just a building. It was a statement, a declaration of power, a message to rival kingdoms, a reminder that Egypt was a civilization unmatched in discipline and vision. Meanwhile, life of the workers continued in its repetitive rhythm. Wake, work, eat, heal, sleep, return. But within that repetition lay purpose. Laughs echoed in the worker villages at night as men gathered around fires, sharing stories of progress. Priests blessed them. Doctors treated them. Families brought comfort. They knew hardship, but they also knew honor. And above everything else, they knew they were shaping something greater than themselves. There were injuries. There were accidents. There were lives lost. No massive undertaking escapes tragedy. But those who died were not forgotten. They were buried with care, honored near the very monument they helped build. Their graves whispered in the winds of eternity. We were here. We helped create greatness. The psychological strength of the builders was just as important as their physical strength, because they were not merely lifting stones. They were lifting Egypt's destiny. Meanwhile, the pharaoh Khufu monitored progress with unwavering expectations. He knew this structure would become his eternal resting place. He knew it would define his legacy. He knew it must be flawless. He trusted his architects. He trusted his workforce. He trusted the discipline of his civilization. But trust came with demand. There could be no weakness, no compromise, no excuses. Every morning, supervisors carried instructions. Schedules remained strict, output measured, workflows balanced. Egypt functioned like a colossal, synchronized machine. And all the while, the pyramid climbed, higher than any structure ever built before, higher than any monument humanity had ever dared to create. With each rising level, shadows grew longer, wind whispered louder, the sky felt closer. Standing on the upper ramps, workers could look down and see not just the desert, but history unfolding below them. They watched caravans carry more supplies. They watched boats glide along the Nile. They watched the grand world far below, while they worked among clouds of dust and sunlight. And silently, something incredible was happening. The pyramid was changing Egypt. It unified the nation, inspired nearby civilizations, elevated engineering knowledge, strengthened cultural pride. It gave people identity. It proved what unity could achieve. It transformed the pharaoh's dream into humanity's greatest achievement. Year after year, stone after stone, effort after effort, the Great Pyramid continued its unstoppable ascent. This was no longer merely the construction of a tomb. This was the creation of a legend still standing thousands of years later, a legend that would outlive empires, survive storms, endure wars, silently challenge every generation to ask, how did they do this? And the answer was being written in sweat, stone, and relentless will.